we are continuing our exploration of those things that can serve as obstacles on our spiritual journey and in our relationship with Allah. Today, I want to focus on how creation, and specifically human beings around us, can serve as impediments in our relationship with Allah. And this is interesting because you might have heard a lot of discussion about community, the value of community, the value of being around good people and spending time in good company. And so today we're going to talk about actually people can also hold you back. People can also be an obstacle in your relationship with Allah. And I want to explore how that's possible. I want to start with a question, and I want to ask you to discuss this with the person beside you. The question is, how do human beings develop value systems? It's a really broad question, I know. How do human beings develop value systems? Bismillah, go for it. Okay. Very nice. Yeah. All right, I know it's just a natural, everyone went quiet, so I'm just going to take that as a sign that we can hear from you guys. What did you guys come up with? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else want to share what they discussed? How many of you found it challenging to kind of discuss this? Anybody? Yeah, it's a pretty abstract at some level discussion, but I think it's important. I think it's important for our conversation today. Anyone want to share anything? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. What's that somewhere? Right, where did they start? Good, good. Khair. Okay, so let's go through this today. Today's going to be a little technical, and I hope you can bear with me, inshallah. I do think, though, if you can bear with me, um, I do think it'll be rather fruitful, inshallah. So, human beings around us serve as an impediment between us and Allah, and as an impediment on the spiritual path, when number one, they influence us, they pressure us, and we end up doing things that are displeasing to Allah. That's, I think, a rather obvious example of how the people around us can hold us back from drawing nearness to Allah, drawing near to Allah. The second way is how we as human beings can, instead of seeking Allah's approval and validation, we're constantly seeking the approval and validation of humans around us. And in that way, our focus is not on Allah, it's on the people around us. They become the obstacle. They become the distraction away from Allah towards themselves. Okay, let's begin to understand how this happens, because I think that's important. It's not just that it happens, but how does this happen? Why? Why do we end up doing this? Why do some of us really struggle with seeking external validation? We can't help but try to please the people around us all the time. And when we do that, inevitably we end up not focusing on Allah. And then we end up not progressing in our spiritual journey because we're not focused on pleasing Him and moving towards Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's start from this point here. Human beings are social beings. Human beings are beings that need other humans. And we don't just need the basic needs and necessities of food, water, shelter. We also need care, comfort, protection, love. One of the interesting experiments that you might want to look into, it's a very famous one for anyone who's studied any of the behavioral sciences. It's known as Harlow's rhesus monkeys experiment. How many of you are familiar with that experiment? And it's a classic example of how, an animal will take and drink milk from one place, but will spend majority of its time with where they find comfort. The belief before that was that humans, whoever gives them food, whoever gives them something to drink and shelter, they just naturally gravitate towards that person. But post this experiment, they realized no, humans do not incline first towards those who feed them. They incline first and primarily to those that care for them, that show them love and warmth. Okay, we as human beings, why is this the case? We're born utterly helpless, completely dependent. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about this in the Quran. He says in one verse in Surah An-Nahl, He says, وَاللَّهُ أَخْرَجَكُم مِّن بُطُونِ أُمَّهَاتِكُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ شَيْئًا. Allah took you out from the wombs of your mothers, not knowing anything. We came into this world not knowing anything. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the stages that human beings go through. And He says, Allahu alladhi khalaqakum min da'fin. Allah is the one who created you in a state of weakness. And then, ثُمَّ جَعَلَ مِن بَعْدِ ضَعْفٍ قُوَّةٍ. After that period of weakness, He gave you strength. And then after the strength, ثُمَّ جَعَلَ مِن بَعْدِ قُوَّةٍ ضَعْفًا وَشَيْبَةً. You return to weakness and old age. It's like the stages humans go through. We start off in a state of weakness. Al-Imam al-Razi, explaining this verse, he says that this initial weakness Allah is speaking about, it's how you're a child and you are completely helpless. You need your parents for everything, for food, to relieve yourself and be clean. The human being has nothing, completely at the mercy of their parents. And all the physical needs have to be met, but also the mental needs, the psychological needs. Important to understand. When we're born, we're completely dependent on the people around us to provide our psychological needs, our emotional needs. See, when someone gets older, we can start to tell them, well, you can kind of work on yourself, right? We talk, in therapy, sometimes they'll give you homework and you have stuff to do for yourself. A young baby can't do anything, completely dependent. And then you go through a period where you have strength now. You have the ability to take action. But ultimately, then you're returned back to weakness. You start to forget, right? You start to forget people's names. You forget the time. You forget the rak'ahs, the units of prayer. I don't know if you have any senior relatives who forget which rak'ah they're in. So it's really hard for them to pray by themselves. It's a really difficult stage towards the end of life. And Allah Ta'ala speaks about this in the Quran and in Surah Al-Hajj as well. So the main point I'm trying to make is we're born, we enter this world completely, both physically and mentally, helpless and dependent. Okay. As we grow, we begin to encounter and engage with objects and people around us. And I'm going to ask you to kind of step back from your current mindset. And imagine you walk into a room where you don't know anything. You don't know what anything is, and you don't know what anything is called. You don't know the function of anything. You don't know the value of anything. It's a world where you're just surrounded by innumerable objects and people as well. Understand that. That's how we all were at the beginning. So one of the first things for children to do is to begin to learn, not one of the first, but early on, one of the things they have to do is learn what things are called. And that's the process of learning language. And so, they find out that this is called a glass, and the thing in it's called water. And I know I'm stating the obvious. But I have to make apparent the obvious. Sometimes it's the most obvious things that can be the most obscure and the things that we miss the most because they're so obvious. So think about that. There's a little baby, a little infant, a little toddler, and just kind of figuring out what things are called. And we don't just learn what things are called. We identify colors as well, which is why if we see something different, we're kind of confused. Because maybe we typically associate something with a certain color, and then you see a different color and you're like, hold on, what is that? And they're like, no, that's a cat too. And they're like, no, but I've only seen gray cats. No, this is an orange cat. I was like, okay, there's also a cat. And here you can refer to Piaget's theory of assimilation and accommodation. Anyone familiar with that? That's where you begin to apply it right here. That's what the human being does. To navigate the world, you start creating concepts. You never interact with concepts. You interact with objects, particular objects. And then across a series of objects, you extract a concept. So you see one human, and you find out this is a man. Another one, this is a man. This is a woman. This is a woman. Eventually, you come to an understanding of what you think is a man or is a woman. Or the same would apply to, cars. So you think anything with 4 tires is a car until someone says, no, it's an SUV. And they're like, okay, wait, why is this called something different? Because it has 4 tires. So they have to revise their definition. It cannot be that everything with 4 tires is a car. What's the difference? Let me pin, okay, it seems like this is a little bigger and stuff. Okay, and it has, the trunk's a little different. That's probably why it's an SUV. And they see a van and they go SUV, and you say, no, that's a van. Like, okay, well, what's going on here? And you're assimilating and accommodating. And you're seeing objects and particulars. And across a series of particulars, you extract a universal, a concept. And so we just see objects in the world. But then we begin to identify their names and form concepts of what they are and how to identify them. And that's why, if you think about it, imagine you had a really small kid and you told him or her, let's say him, you say, be a good boy. That's somewhat meaningless. Do you know why? Because what does good mean? That little child has to see enough instances of what constitutes good to then understand the concept of good. So you show them, hey, sharing your toys, good. Finishing your plate, good. Not hitting someone, good. And you start giving them a list of things that are good, 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 good. What's the commonality across all of them? That's good. Do you see that? Like even abstract concepts, it's not clear to a child, be a good boy. What does good mean? It's not clear to the child. They haven't seen enough instances of it. Okay. And so not only, now here's the challenge. What do you pay attention to? How many of you have been somewhere, like a new country, first time in the country? Isn't it hard to capture everything? Like you just want to pause, stand, and just like look around. There's so much to take in, right? Now, all of you walked in the masjid earlier. I don't know how many of you noticed that there's like a fire alarm, the red one up there. Did y'all notice that before I pointed at it? Probably not. But did y'all notice the chair here? And the answer is probably yes. And that's a question to ask. Why is it when you walked in a room, you noticed certain things and you just totally missed others? Did you notice the vents up there below the speaker? Maybe you totally missed it. Why? But maybe you noticed this right here. No, it's an important question to ask. The human being has selective attention. I've spoken about this in Thrive before. Dan Simon's famous gorilla experiment. The ability of the human being to notice certain things and totally miss others. Totally miss others. That's why you can go into a room, or you can be in a crowded room, and somebody can call your name and you'll hear it. You won't hear anything else. So many people are talking, you catch nothing. But out of nowhere, amidst all the buzz of voices and murmuring, all of a sudden you hear Usman, and you just turn. How did I just notice Usman? I didn't hear anything else they were talking about. The moment they took my name, I caught it. And it's because we have a heightened sensitivity to our names. Someone could be talking nearby, you have no idea. You're not even paying attention. But somehow you'll catch your name. Have you noticed that? Because we have a heightened sensitivity. We're constantly on the lookout for our name being taken anywhere because we want to know when people are talking about us. We direct our attention. We choose. The question is, what do you choose to direct your attention to? You're a little kid. So when you walk in a room, what should you do? How many of you have been scolded when you were younger for walking into a room of guests and not behaving the way you should have? Because you were confused. Where do I start? Do I start with this person or over here? And should I just go and say salam? Should I shake hands? Should I just give a general salam? What should I do? Because there's so many options and there's so many people. Should I just go sit down quietly and not interrupt the conversation? You see how many things go through the mind of a child? Because again, it's almost foreign to them. You know how we go to like a different country and it's all foreign to us? And we're kind of standing there trying to take it all in? Well, that's what a child does to the world. And so we can't notice and see everything. You know when you're driving, have you ever missed something where someone beside you goes to you, hey, did you see that? You're like, where? I mean, I was focused on the road. You totally missed it. Why? And why did they catch it? Because you're locked in, you're driving, so you want to make sure you don't hit the car in front of you, right? You don't want to hit the car in front of you, and you don't have to worry about it. Like your wife will tell you a mile away, like, don't, I'm joking. But you're trying to make sure you don't hit the car in front of you. So you're not really paying attention to what's written on the board over there in front of the mall. But maybe the passenger looks over and sees it, and they turn to you and say, "Do you see it?" And you say, "I didn't see it. Like, I'm over here." Because we direct our attention. And you have to choose where you direct your attention. That's a question we have to ask. Now remember, the world all around us is, meaning it exists. The question becomes, what ought we pay attention to? David Hume had a famous distinction. You cannot derive an ought from an is. It's the idea of things are what they are. By merely knowing what they are, it doesn't tell you anything about how they should be or how you should interact with them. Because things are just things. The world is just the world. What should you pay attention to? What should you notice? How do you as a young child figure out what's actually important and classic example, right? Classic example. A child is walks in a room. What's usually the first thing children notice? Generally. 2-year-old, yeah. If you have a phone, definitely. What else? That sounded personal, by the way. It's like, man, my relative is stealing my phone. Yeah. What else? Yeah. Cookies, okay, in the kitchen, right? But if it's not in the kitchen, then what? Toys. Have you noticed that? If there's like Lego in the corner, they'll walk in, there'll be humans sitting there, and they'll just look at the Lego. Direct their attention. And then we have to direct them and say, no, go say salam, go shake hands. And then what does the kid do? The kid walks over and says this, Assalamu alaikum, right? Because he's locked in. She's locked in. They're focused on the toys. What's of interest to them? As a young child, we then have to train our kids. When you meet humans, look at them. Pay attention. This is something I'm working on with my kids. They have a tendency to whatever else is interesting in the room, they look at it. And so an adult will come and say, Assalamu alaikum to me, and they'll say, Assalamu alaikum to my child, and my child will be like, Assalamu alaikum salam, right? They're just looking somewhere else. And I have to remind them after, hey, no, I know you have a choice. You can look at the human, or you can look at whatever else you're looking at. The value system I want you to have is that humans are more important than those things. So you should look at the human when you say salam. And even that, teaching that when you look at somebody, you're showing them value. These are all implicit teachings. Does that make sense? And sometimes it's so obvious to us that we forget that kids don't know this. We get mad at them. Why are you not looking? You should look at them. Why aren't you looking at them when you shake hands? Because it's so obvious to us that's what you're supposed to do. But it's not obvious to kids. And so that's something to think about. When you enter a room, what's the first thing you notice? What's the first thing you notice when you enter a room? When you meet somebody, what's the first thing you notice? Because there's a lot to notice, right? There's a whole bunch of things you could notice. What is it that you notice? See, somebody, and you start to realize the impact of our value system. Somebody who is concerned about safety. When they walk in, what are they looking at? All the safety measures in the room. Somebody who's concerned about cleanliness will walk in and notice certain things because it's important to them. Someone who values accessibility. When they go to a building, one of the first things they'll pay attention to is, wait, how accessible is this building? It's a value system. Amongst all the things you could notice, the question becomes, why is it that you notice what you notice? Our attention is directed by our values. Our attention is directed by our values. So many of us, growing up, we didn't even know that there was an automotive section in the store, in the mall, of like a certain store, because we didn't care about the automotive section. Where's the toy section? And as you got older, you started noticing where's the clothing section. And then suddenly when you get older, you start paying attention to the grocery section and how much things cost in the groceries. And you start noticing different parts of the store, and then you get really old and you start noticing the health section, right? Like how much are the vitamins, you know? So you start noticing different things. No, it's really interesting. What do people notice? Some people who don't drink coffee will miss all the coffee shops. They just don't know there's a coffee shop there. And coffee drinkers? Well, no. Like where you can find any coffee shop. This is a really interesting thing to think about. You know, a lot of personal trainers, if you meet them, one of the first things they'll look at you and see is like, what's your physical health? You notice that? Anyone noticed that before? I've met a few like that, where the first thing they'll notice is like, oh, you do this. I'm like, thanks, you know, like, how are you? Right? But that's what they notice. They can't help. They can't help but notice that about you. It's the value system we have. And so as we're growing up, it's important to note that the people around us, when they direct our attention towards things and towards concepts and towards people, they emphasize to us what is important, what should be paid attention to, and what's not important. And in that way, we begin to develop value systems. Does that make sense? And it even impacts the way we look at the world. There's a hadith that supports this, where the Prophet ﷺ said, كُلُّ مَوْلُودٍ يُولَدُ عَلَى الْفِطْرَةِ. Every child is born upon a fitra, a natural disposition. Then their parents influence them into which religion they choose. Their parents persuade them that this is what's important, and this belief system is valuable, and this is important. And the child goes forward to start believing this is important, that's not important. I mean, that's why we have brainwashing. Brainwashing is essentially a recalibration of someone's value system. That's what it is. And if you're older, you have to be a bit more subtle and manipulative. With a young child, it's very easy. With a young child, they're impressionable. They can't think critically about what's being fed to them. So they just kind of accept it. And so they can develop very flawed value systems. And it's not restricted just to objects and concepts. Probably most important for our conversation today is you also begin to develop a certain understanding of what makes you valuable. Right? You start to develop a concept of what makes me valuable. Do I matter? Am I important at all? And if so, what about me is important? See, we have an inherent need for love, as we started with that idea. So we're going to seek the approval and the validation of those around us. But we have to think about, like, okay, what does that even look like? Because you guys ever heard praise the child's effort, not necessarily the outcome? What's the difference? It's what is the value that you're instilling? If you only emphasize the outcome and the fact that they got, perfect on this test, well, what you've implicitly conveyed to them is perfect is what makes you lovable and acceptable. That's what it is. Because I'm showing you love. Why? In the child's mind? Well, because I got perfect. And so in the child's mind, perfect is valuable. Okay. There's a big difference if you tell the child, did you do your best? Did you study hard? Did you do everything you could? You may have had a few mistakes? Okay, good. The fact that you tried your best, good for you. And learn from the mistakes. The child learns what? Doing your best is valuable. I am accepted when I do my best. I am loved when I do my best. Do you understand? Like, it's quite a sensitive matter. You have human beings that are completely impressionable. They're completely impressionable. We don't think too carefully about what we say and how we say it. We just, as adults, know what we want the child to do. So we just say it. You need to do better. You need to get, how come you messed up 10 marks? We don't mean to harm the child or set standards that are unhealthy. We don't mean it. But sometimes we don't realize how our words and our statements and the standards that we're setting are impacting the value system of this child. Do you see that? Have you ever seen this? Where a parent will teach a child something, and then the child will go and judge other people so hard by that standard? You ever seen that? It's kind of embarrassing, I'm telling you as a parent, because you're trying to teach your child the right thing, but you also don't want them to be judgmental. But they don't know that. So you tell them, they'll say, "Can I have some Coke?" And you'll say, like, "No, it's not healthy," or something. And then they'll see somebody drinking Coke. And they'll go up to them and say, "Why are you drinking Coke?" And this adult's like caught off guard. They're like, because Coke, I like it. My mom says it's not good for you. You shouldn't be drinking it. And this parent's like, the adult's like, okay, sorry, right? Because the kid doesn't know otherwise. No, think about that. To them, and here you can get into the stages of cognitive development. To kids, it's black and white. If it's bad, it's bad. It doesn't matter who you are and whether you're a stranger or a guest. Bad is bad, wrong is wrong, and right is right. And as you go on, you start to develop a more nuanced system of, okay, I can say it to these people, I can't say it to them. This is how I say it, this is how I don't say it. You develop that later on. But young children, whatever value system they have, savage. Absolutely. Raw and unfiltered. The darnest things. You've heard that? Kids, absolutely. It's important to be. It's challenging, but that's kind of how they understand things. So they begin to understand what makes them acceptable, what's valuable about them. If they're constantly getting approval and being shown love for certain things, they will conclude from that, this is what's important. So a child, have you ever seen this happen? The child will go with like Lego and build like this really cool little house, 2-story or something, bring it to the parents, and they're proud. The child's proud, like, "Mom, Dad, I put so much work into this. Look at this." And the parent completely dismisses it. "But did you do your homework?" And the kid's like, "Yeah, I did it." And they'll come bring it, but they're kind of like dejected. I tried to show you something that's important to me. You did not value it. I did not receive the love, approval, validation I was looking for. What might the child eventually conclude? My value lies not in my creativity. It lies in my academic achievement. I'm only as valuable as my marks. It's a little personal, isn't it? It's a tough one. I'm only as valuable as my accomplishments. I'm only as valuable as how I look and how thin I am. When you have parents make fun of your body image. Yeah. Parents will, again, very naively, very unsuspectingly, they're just thinking of, well, I want my son or daughter to grow up to be marriageable. If we're just being brutally honest. That's how they're thinking. So they're thinking they need to be accomplished in this, they need to look this way, they need to be this, and they set these standards they don't realize are hampering the child's growth. Because now the child is only focused on certain aspects of their life, placing all their value in those few things. And so here's also where you can loop in attachment theory. In terms of, if a child has a parent that's very responsive to the child's needs, that recognizes and is very well attuned to the emotional state of the child, gives the child attention, lets them know that they're good, gives them validation. Hey, good job. You're really good at this. I don't know if you've ever done this with any of your younger relatives. I know it's slightly manipulative, but you want them to be good at something and you just tell them, you're really good at this. And they're like, okay, I got to prove that I am good at this. Because now they identify as someone who's good at this. And then they work really hard at it. Because that's how they received an identity. I'm somebody who has really good handwriting. So I'm going to sit down and practice my handwriting. I'm somebody who's a really good baker. Now I'm going to pride myself on my baking skills and I'm going to bake. No, I'm serious. It's very powerful to tell someone that they're good at something, to approve and to validate their competency. Why do I talk about competency? Because this helps for you to realize your self-worth. I know I'm a good baker. I don't need you to approve that for me. And if you don't approve it, it's probably because you got bad taste, right? That's your problem. Because I know I'm good. No, I'm serious. When you have self-worth, and that's why you have what's called self-determination theory. 3 main ingredients to it. Competence. We want our children to be competent at things. And the things that they're competent at, they will pride themselves over it. And they will not seek approval and validation from others in it. Autonomy. Give the child space to actually pursue it. Many of us did not have autonomy growing up. We were forced to do certain things, and we don't want to do them. And the worst is when you're good at it. It's kind of love-hate, because you're really good at it, but then you're not choosing to do it. You're being forced to do it. So then you're kind of like, yeah, I don't really like math, but you're brilliant at it. Right? It's kind of weird relationship you have. And relatedness. Then you need to have people around you that can affirm your identity in what you do. And that's why if you can find relatedness, you will often ignore people who, relatively speaking, probably love you more. But hey, they're not giving you that relatedness. And this is where parents really struggle. Because they will demand from their child a certain standard. And the child, likes to do something else. And the child's friends affirm their interest in that. Or the parent rejects it. And they lean more towards who? Their friends. Because we look for relatedness. We look for a sense of belonging. Even though we know objectively our parents are the ones who brought us up, who did everything for us. But they didn't recognize our love for this thing. And our friends did. And they affirmed us with that. And they told us that we were valuable people for whatever that was that we're doing. They respected us for being really good at a certain video game. Or for being a great drawer, like a drawer. An artist. Whereas your parents were like, none of this. No. You need to be studying to get into med school. Right? Like that's what their standard was. No, I'm serious. We don't realize. We don't realize that we can grow up desperate for the approval of others, when growing up, we never figured out who we were and what we're actually good at and what makes us acceptable and lovable. I'm very serious about this, right? And so now tying this to the idea of human beings as impediments to our spiritual growth. How? Someone who does not have an inherent, clear sense of self-worth. They have a tendency to please everybody around them. Well, they're going to be very susceptible to peer pressure. No? Very susceptible to peer pressure. Where do you want to go to eat? Whatever you say. No opinion. Low maintenance. Whatever you say. Because if I'm low maintenance, then everyone's going to love me. No one has to work hard to maintain the relationship with me. I'm just a good, easygoing friend. But what happens when it starts to go into the haram direction? Now, we still don't have an identity to say, no, I shouldn't do this. The standard is what? Keep these people happy so that they like me. And so if they want to go do something haram, as guilty as you might feel, you'll do it. Because you don't have your own inner moral compass. You don't have an inner value system that you hold yourself to. You allow others to dictate that to you. Because you were never given the opportunity to develop that growing up. The system around you growing up was always jump through our hoops and you will be acceptable. And so we went through life jumping through hoops. And here we are now 18, 20, 22 and we're still jumping through hoops. And what's really interesting is that if you do this long enough and with like a commitment to keeping everybody happy, you become extremely resentful. Extremely resentful to everybody and everything. Except maybe those few people who don't put any pressure on you. Why do you become resentful? Because you have no power. You don't choose anything for yourself. All you're doing every day, all day, what's occupying your mind What's going to keep them happy? What's going to keep her happy? What's going to keep him happy? Just people. It's exhausting. You hate yourself because there is no yourself. There's just me living other people's lives and their wants of me. And people can go in interesting directions from here. One common direction is a strong rejection. When they get to a point where maybe the people around them, maybe their parents push them too hard and they reject it all. And then you see them just turn. You know that one person who was, mashallah, jumping through all the hoops, and one day you're like, what happened? Snapped. Boom. Like, it's almost like a 180. They could not sustain it that long. And they end up doing things and just really like Jack in a box, just boom, everywhere. You know? Everywhere. Exploring all different things. And people are confused. People are like, wait, I don't know what happened to my child. Growing up, my child did whatever I wanted, always listened to me. You know, everything I told them to do, mashallah. They always got first in class. Yeah. Maybe because they wanted to make you happy and keep you happy. And in the process, they had no idea who they were or what they wanted from life. And they got to a point where they couldn't live with this anymore. That disconnect from yourself is so painful. Especially when you see others doing things and you admire them. And you're like, I want to do that. But you can't. Because you're going to make all these people upset. But then you feel powerless. Why? Why are they allowed to do that? And they're celebrated for doing that. And I'm barely celebrated for jumping through these hoops. And then mess enough things up, face enough rejection from people, and you say, what? There's no point. I'll never make these people happy. And it's a painful moment. Why? Because up until now, your existence was defined by jumping through people's hoops. You've given up on their hoops now. But you don't have any direction of yourself. You have no idea where to go from here because you've never thought about it for yourself. And so you're stuck. What do I do? Usually what you're going to end up doing is the people that you're surrounded with, you're going to do whatever they do. And that's why it's so dangerous. Because if we don't see, one question you have religiously is, well, you know, there's a lot of conversation in psychology about nature versus nurture. What about Islam? What's like Islam say about nature versus nurture? And you can find arguments for both. It's both, really. It's nature in the sense that no matter what happens, every one of us will stand before Allah and give an account for our actions. Why? Because we chose our actions. We chose them. So we can't say that person or that person. No, you chose your actions. But it's also nurture to a certain degree, because the Prophet ﷺ told us a person is on the religion of their friend. Al-mar'u ala dini khalili. But the idea is that you get to choose your friends. You choose them, then they influence you, almost inevitably. But you're responsible for who you choose to surround yourself with. And so the human being is kind of in both. Now, so people shape us, but we're responsible for choosing whom we allow around us to shape us. Now, one thing is that if they're not good friends, they will negatively influence us. And the Quran speaks about this in Surah Al-Furqan. It's a well-known verse, or verses. Allah Ta'ala says, وَيَوْمَ يَعَضُّ الظَّالِمُ عَلَى يَدَيْهِ يَقُولُ يَا لَيْتَنِ اتَّخَذْتُ مَعَ الرَّسُولِ سَبِيلًا. Allah Ta'ala says, beware of the day the wrongdoer, the zalim, will bite their nails in regret. And they'll say, I wish I had followed the way of the messenger. يَا وَيْلَتَا لَيْتَنِي لَمْ أَتَّخِذْ فُلَانًا خَلِيلًا. This person will say, man, I really wish I had never taken so-and-so as a close friend. It was he who truly made me stray from the reminder after it had reached me. لَقَدْ أَضَلَّنِي عَنِ الذِّكْرِ بَعْدَ إِذْ جَاءَنِي. This is, the scholars differ about the occasion of revelation. But there's a story mentioned about a man by the name of Uqba ibn Abi Mu'ayt. He's one of the disbelievers in Mecca. And he was friends with a man by the name of Ubay bin Khalaf. And they both rejected the Prophet ﷺ's message vehemently. But one day, Uqba, he had a dinner. And he invited all the leaders of Mecca, of the Quraysh. So he invited the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ came, but he told Uqba, "Oh Uqba, I will not eat your food unless you say the Shahada." Uqba's like, man, I can't have this man come and then leave without eating. Like, that's dishonor to me. So he said, okay, I'll say it. I don't mean it, but whatever. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And the Prophet ﷺ sat, ate the food, left. Later on, Ubay bin Khalaf, the friend of Uqba, found out. He came to Uqba. He said, Uqba, is it true? I heard, like, you said the Shahada. Uqba's like, look, I only said it because this man was refusing to eat my food unless I said it. So I didn't want to be dishonored, so I just said the words. He said, I don't believe you. I think you're rebelling against our forefathers. I'll only believe you if you go and spit, وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ, on the noble face of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That's what he did. And the narrations mention that this was the occasion of these verses being revealed. That because Uqba sought the validation of Ubay, that he was misguided. The people around us can end up taking us away from Allah when we don't have a clear moral compass of what we want, what is right, what is wrong, and we continue to allow others around us to influence us. Now, that's the more obvious. Like, that's when someone pushes you to do something wrong. Let me point out another way that peer pressure is harmful that many of us don't realize. It's a challenging one, but I'm going to say it. Sometimes the people around you may not push you to do something wrong, but they may hold you back from growth. Why? Either because they don't have a growth mindset. They're just complacent with who they are. They're just happy. They're not doing wrong per se, right? They're not doing wrong, but they're just satisfied with how they are. And in that way, they hold you back from growth. Another way is sometimes, and this is a really challenging one, you know, if you don't surround yourself with people that you look up to, that you can strive to be like, then you can begin to feel like I'm good because I'm better than my whole friend circle. There's no need. You don't feel an urgency to grow. Why? Because when I compare myself to the 5 friends I have here, I'm the most religious out of all of them. Maybe some of them don't pray. Some of them don't come to the masjid. And so in our eyes, they're not that great religiously, spiritually. I'm good. There's no urgency to change. There's no like goal forward because everyone around you, technically, you're the best. Do you understand? And in that way, they can hold us back from growth. Do you understand that? Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily that's what's going to happen, but it can happen. Sometimes, if you're the one who has the most knowledge in your friend circle, maybe you're motivated enough to lift them up, and that's beautiful. But it's not always the case. Sometimes we also fall into their habits of complacency or just, I'm good. I don't need to keep working hard. But the believer's mindset should never be that. Always, I need to grow, I need to grow, I need to grow, and I need to surround myself with people. They don't have to be necessarily even better than me, but they need to be on the path of growth. They need to be walking the same path. Now, that's the first way that people around us can serve as impediments in our relationship with Allah. It's like they can almost actively or implicitly prevent us from growing by sometimes pushing us in the wrong direction or just making us complacent. Another way that holds us back is when we're constantly, like I said at the beginning, seeking the approval and validation of those around us. And this is really challenging. Why? Because then we show off. We show off. We're performative. We wear a mask. We walk through life with this mask on. And we go on living a life that we're not happy with in the hopes of making other people happy. And you know what makes it really challenging in our time? This is a whole conversation in and of itself. I don't have time for it today at all, but social media hasn't helped, right? Before, if you wanted to seek validation, you had to speak to them. Maybe you'd have to be with them so they could see you and then be like, good, mashallah, or give us some compliment. Now you don't even have to leave your house. You don't even have to leave your bed. You're feeling a little down about yourself and your image. Let me just post some pictures of myself. And I'll have those clutch friends come through in the comment section and boost. But that's not a sustainable way to go through life. How often are you just going to share pictures in the hopes of receiving that little dopamine shot? Or you're feeling a little, down spiritually. Let me post something religious so that people think I'm religious, so that I can convince myself I'm religious. But that's, again, constantly seeking other people to define who we are. Look, one person said, you can never give up seeking validation. Humans are almost inherently designed to seek some degree of validation from others. It's a question of seeking validation for the right reasons and from the right people. What do we mean by that? What if we were to think about seeking validation from Allah? What does it take for me to be acceptable in front of Allah? What does it take for me to be and here's where we have to start to revisit our definition of success. Because think about this, the only reason we jump through people's hoops is because we think it contributes to our success. Inherently, that's what we want. But why is that the criteria of success? It takes courage. Number one, what's the first thing? You have to realize how this is harming you. If you don't realize how people-pleasing is harming you, how seeking people's validation is harming you, you will never change it. There will be no urgency to change it. It's when you get to a point and you realize, wow, number one, I'll never make everybody happy, number one. Number two, wait, they're humans just like me. Why do they get to set the standards for my life? They're comfortable with their own standards, and I'm allowing them to set the standards for me? And it hurts to come to that realization. It hurts to come to the realization that sometimes the people that cared about you the most, the only reason they held you to certain standards was so that they could have a certain status amongst their group of friends. And they could brag to their friends, my son is doing this and my daughter's doing that. And you're like, wait, am I just a trophy? Is that what's been fueling all of this whole time? And you start to realize, wait, I'm losing sleep over this. I'm anxious. I'm miserable. I hate my job. I hate how I can't do anything for myself. I hate the people in my life that I'm supposed to love. Something's wrong. And people get to that point where they realize, wow, this is not healthy for me. I can't keep doing this. And so that's the first step. Recognize the harm that it's doing to you, seeking the validation of other people. Allama Iqbal, he says, and I'm not saying the Urdu, he says, the freedom that you seek, he says, that one sajda, that one submission to Allah, that one seeking of approval from Allah that you find so difficult will free you from seeking approval from 1,000 others. It will free you from bowing and jumping through the hoops of 1,000 other people. That's the whole idea of Tawheed. Why live trying to jump through the hoops of 1,000 people? I mean, what are you, a circus animal? What if you just said, no, Ya Allah, what do you want from me? And those people that support you in pursuing what is pleasing to Allah, those are your people right there. those are your people. And this is challenging too. Why? Because sometimes you have to give up friendships. You're no longer the friend that's just available and will do anything I say. You have your own life, and that's challenging. So maybe some friends who are around you just because you were so agreeable and because you jump through their hoops all the time, maybe they'll turn their backs on you. And you're scared of that. You're like, I don't want to lose my friends. But again, do you want to keep them and lose yourself? Or do you want to find yourself and lose those people that were not true to you to begin with? Do you understand? This is truly a matter of life and death. And so there's a lot here. I hope I've planted some seeds of thought and reflection for you guys on this topic. It's a very important one because sometimes we don't realize how much people around us are holding us back. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us tawfiq to be people that are able to escape the constant approval and validation seeking that we might be suffering from. May He grant us the realization that we don't have to jump through everybody's hoops. We have to hold ourselves to the standards that Allah holds us to. May He grant us the tawfiq to have the courage. It takes courage. May He grant us the courage to stand up for ourselves and realize that my life, but also my hereafter is at stake. And I have to commit myself to this. I have to really understand what my values are. May He grant us this realization. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Jazakumullah khair to all of you for coming out. Inshallah, next Monday we won't have a session. It's a long weekend, and so we won't be having the session. But the following Monday, inshallah, we will continue. And so we hope you'll join us for that, inshallah. All right, you guys have a good night, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.